"I can't believe she did this," Daniel muttered under his breath as the last rays of sunset spilled across the hotel balcony. Margaret stood behind him, her hands folded neatly, observing the tension settle between father and son without a word. The trip had started as a celebration, a weekend getaway for the family to reconnect. But subtle oddities had been mounting throughout the day. Victoria had insisted on taking the scenic route, seemingly innocuous, yet her laughter felt rehearsed, and her attention was always half on her phone, half on the conversations around her. The suite was immaculate, everything in its place as Margaret had prepared it, from the scented candles lining the bathroom counter to the carefully packed luggage with clothes folded just so. Margaret had spent hours the previous evening double-checking reservations, ensuring the itinerary was seamless, wanting nothing but a smooth experience for her son and daughter-in-law. But now, standing on the balcony, she noticed the little inconsistencies, a missing envelope from her briefcase, a document slipped out of place on the desk, subtle shifts in the way Victoria spoke to Daniel when she thought no one else was listening. Daniel's expression changed from confusion to dawning realization, his eyes narrowing as he pieced together the sequence of events that had led to this moment. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line, the calm exterior belying the storm of thought beneath, weighing each observation, cataloging each detail, knowing that patience and quiet attention had revealed the truth without confrontation. The gentle breeze carried the scent of the nearby lake, crisp and clean, contrasting sharply with the tension that hung between the three of them. Margaret's mind replayed the earlier conversations, the subtle insinuations, the carefully placed suggestions Victoria had made to redirect attention away from certain financial matters, all seemingly benign but cumulatively forming a pattern that now could not be ignored. Daniel's hand gripped the railing as he processed the implications, the way Victoria had maneuvered the itinerary, the diverted receipts, the altered confirmations, all signs that something significant had been concealed from him and from Margaret. Yet Margaret remained composed, her posture erect, her gaze steady on the horizon, demonstrating that the years of managing crises and observing human behavior had taught her the value of calm, the power of quiet perception. The air seemed to thicken with anticipation as Daniel's voice broke the silence, low and controlled, asking questions that required Victoria to account for her decisions, her tone betraying the first flickers of defensiveness. Margaret's observations sharpened, noting the subtle shifts in facial expression, the tightening of hands, the brief hesitation before words were carefully chosen. Each movement, each pause, each minor infraction told a story she had learned to read over decades of navigating family dynamics. She reflected on how often she had mediated conflicts, smoothed misunderstandings, and quietly supported her son through his challenges, never expecting acknowledgement, only peace and harmony in return. And yet, here it was, laid bare on a calm evening, the careful orchestration that had undermined her trust, the manipulation that had gone unnoticed until now. Margaret felt no anger, no immediate urge to confront. Instead, a clarity settled in her mind, a recognition that knowledge itself was a form of empowerment, and that the truth, once seen, could guide the next steps with precision. She glanced at Daniel, noting the mixture of surprise and concern on his face, and knew that his understanding of the situation was still forming. The realization that Victoria's actions were deliberate now hung between them like a tangible presence, and Margaret, with her measured breathing and unwavering composure, allowed the moment to stretch, to exist fully, knowing that the revelation itself carried weight, and that patience and observation had been the instruments that brought it to light. Margaret moved quietly through the suite, her eyes scanning the room with meticulous attention, noting every item in its place and every small detail that might have shifted since her careful preparations. The soft hum of the air conditioner and the distant call of birds outside the window created a calm background, masking the undercurrent of tension that she perceived in the subtle interactions between Daniel and Victoria. She observed Daniel pacing slowly, his brow furrowed, the way his fingers tapped against the railing betraying the thought process unfolding in his mind. Victoria, meanwhile, lingered near the minibar, pouring herself a glass of water with precision that seemed deliberate. Her laughter at a previous joke now ringing hollow against the realization forming in Daniel. Margaret reflected on the morning, when she had awakened early to organize the breakfast tray with freshly brewed coffee, neatly folded napkins, and pastries that Daniel liked, hoping to start the day with warmth and family connection. Yet even then, small anomalies had stood out: a misplaced receipt, a subtle hesitation in Victoria's voice, an unnecessary comment meant to distract. Margaret catalogued each observation silently, her posture poised, her expression neutral, but internally she traced the threads of these occurrences, connecting them into a coherent pattern that explained the unease she felt but could not articulate to anyone without revealing the depth of her knowledge. She remembered moments from the past week, a series of seemingly trivial decisions by Victoria that now appeared calculated, the change in dinner reservations, the adjustment of activity schedules, and the unexplained delays in communication, all minor in isolation but cumulatively significant. Margaret's reflection extended to her own instincts, honed over years of managing the household, anticipating problems before they emerged, and discerning human motives with subtle precision. She had learned to read between the lines, to notice the almost imperceptible cues that others overlooked. And now those skills were guiding her understanding of the present moment. Daniel's voice broke the quiet, questioning facts that did not align, his tone steady but edged with disbelief. Margaret did not intervene, allowing him to explore the inconsistencies while she continued her silent analysis. Each response from Victoria was measured, and slightly defensive, confirming Margaret's growing suspicion without overt confrontation. The afternoon sunlight shifted across the balcony, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor, and Margaret used the natural rhythm of the day to her advantage, moving with deliberate calm, checking small details, and maintaining an air of normalcy that concealed the gravity of her observations. She reflected on the past decisions, the time she had overlooked minor slights for the sake of family harmony, the countless small compromises that had gone unnoticed. Yet now the clarity of the current moment revealed that these earlier oversights had allowed subtle manipulations to take root. Margaret understood that patience and observation were the tools she had relied upon to navigate this situation, and she continued to employ them with care, ensuring that any future actions would be informed, deliberate, and precise. As Daniel began to piece together the sequence of events, Margaret's calm presence provided a stabilizing influence, allowing him to consider the truth without the added weight of confrontation. The suite remained quiet, the soft ambient sounds blending with the internal focus of both mother and son, creating an atmosphere in which insight could emerge naturally, and the layers of subtle deception could be understood fully before any overt discussion took place. Margaret's gaze remained steady, her mind attentive to the nuances of human behavior, and her movements deliberate, reflecting the internal discipline she had cultivated over a lifetime of experience, quietly asserting control over the situation without the need for loud declarations or visible reactions. Margaret followed Daniel into the living area, her steps measured and silent, observing the subtle tension as he examined the stack of papers that Victoria had left casually on the side table. The afternoon light filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a soft glow on the polished wooden floors, highlighting the neatness of the space Margaret had maintained meticulously. Each item in the room reflected her attention to detail, from the folded throw blankets on the sofa to the arrangement of coasters on the coffee table. Daniel flipped through the documents slowly, his expression a mixture of disbelief and growing understanding as he began to recognize the discrepancies and the minor alterations that had been made to schedules, receipts, and reservations over the past week. Margaret watched without interrupting, noting the slight furrow in his brow, the way his hand trembled as he pieced together the timeline of events, each seemingly innocuous detail revealing a calculated effort that had gone unnoticed until now. Victoria lingered near the doorway, her voice careful and measured as she offered explanations that seemed rehearsed, each answer meticulously chosen to divert attention from the inconsistencies. Margaret remained poised, her eyes attentive to the small movements and micro-expressions, the way she had learned to read human behavior over decades of experience. She reflected on the journey that had led to this moment, remembering the careful planning she had done for the trip, the extra effort to accommodate everyone's preferences, and the quiet hope she had held that the family would enjoy a seamless weekend together. The realization of manipulation, however subtle, weighed on the atmosphere, a quiet tension that Margaret allowed to settle as she assessed the situation calmly. Daniel's questions became more pointed, probing gently but firmly into areas that had previously seemed ordinary, and Margaret's awareness allowed her to gauge both his emotional state and Victoria's reactions with clarity. The sunlight shifted slowly, and Margaret's gaze remained steady, her presence grounding the room in quiet observation. She considered the patterns she had seen, the repeated small choices by Victoria that now clearly formed a picture of deliberate control, and she took note of each without judgment, simply recording the truth of what had occurred. Margaret's mind worked through strategies for addressing the situation, weighing timing and method with careful precision, knowing that her calm and deliberate approach would carry more weight than immediate confrontation. She observed the subtle dynamic between Daniel and Victoria, the way he absorbed the facts and the way Victoria's posture stiffened under scrutiny. Margaret's quiet vigilance, coupled with her deep understanding of human behavior, created an environment in which the truth emerged naturally, without the need for raised voices or dramatic displays. Each passing moment offered further insight, reinforcing the clarity that had begun to form in both her mind and Daniel's, and Margaret remained attentive to the unfolding situation, ready to act with precision when the right moment presented itself. She maintained her composed demeanor, allowing the small yet revealing details to speak for themselves, and in doing so, ensured that the knowledge she now possessed would guide the family through the delicate revelations ahead, without unnecessary confrontation or emotional flair. Margaret retreated to the corner of the living area, keeping her hands folded and her expression calm as she observed the interaction between Daniel and Victoria. The evening sunlight cast long, warm shadows across the room, and the faint scent of pine from the balcony reminded her of the surrounding forest that stretched beyond the lake. Each small detail in the suite, from the polished wood of the coffee table to the neatly arranged cushions on the sofa, reflected the careful planning she had put into preparing this trip, a gesture meant to foster connection and harmony. Daniel continued to review the documents, now with a growing sense of clarity as inconsistencies became apparent. The subtle manipulations that Victoria had executed over the past week, revealing themselves through small errors and omitted information. Margaret noted the way Victoria's eyes shifted when confronted with specific points, the slight tightening of her jaw, the careful avoidance of direct answers, and she catalogued these observations silently, her mind processing the full sequence of events with methodical precision. She reflected on previous occasions when small adjustments had seemed inconsequential, minor schedule changes or last-minute cancellations, and recognized that these earlier actions now formed a clear pattern, a deliberate orchestration to conceal her intentions from both Daniel and herself. Margaret's posture remained upright, her breathing steady, a quiet counterbalance to the tension in the room. She watched as Daniel asked probing questions, not accusing but seeking clarification, and observed Victoria's composed responses that barely concealed the strain beneath the surface. The air between them was charged with quiet understanding, each word and gesture weighed and measured, revealing truths without loud declarations. Margaret's mind drifted briefly to the morning, recalling the meticulous preparation of breakfast, the perfectly brewed coffee, the fresh fruit and pastries arranged carefully on the tray, all offered in the spirit of nurturing family togetherness. Now, however, these efforts took on a new meaning, highlighting the contrast between her intentions and Victoria's calculated actions. She recognized that patience and observation were her strongest tools, and she allowed herself to step back, analyzing the situation with clarity and control, noting the ways in which each person's behavior revealed underlying motives. Daniel's realization seemed to unfold in slow motion, the pieces falling into place, and Margaret remained the silent anchor, her presence providing both support and perspective. Victoria's subtle attempts to redirect attention were met with quiet awareness, Margaret noting each nuance without comment, allowing the truth to surface organically. As the light softened outside, Margaret's calm vigilance created a framework within which clarity could emerge, each small detail observed and mentally recorded, ensuring that when action was required, it would be deliberate, measured, and precise, guided by the quiet strength and insight that came from decades of careful observation and understanding of human behavior. Margaret remained seated in the corner of the suite, her gaze steady as she observed Daniel continue to examine the documents scattered across the coffee table. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the large windows, casting a warm glow over the polished wooden floors and the carefully arranged furniture. Every detail of the suite reflected Margaret's careful preparation, from the neatly folded blankets on the sofa to the precise placement of decorative items on the shelves. Daniel's expression shifted as he pieced together the sequence of events, noticing subtle discrepancies that Victoria had tried to conceal, minor changes in reservation dates, and carefully omitted notes that now revealed a pattern of manipulation. Margaret observed how Victoria shifted in her chair, a slight tension in her shoulders and a quick glance toward Daniel, betraying a nervousness she tried to mask with calm speech. Margaret's thoughts drifted to earlier in the day, recalling the breakfast she had prepared with fresh fruit, pastries, and coffee, laid out with care to provide a sense of warmth and normalcy. She reflected on the seemingly small adjustments Victoria had suggested, how each one had appeared harmless, yet collectively formed a strategy that had temporarily obscured the truth. Margaret catalogued each observation silently, noting the calculated ways in which Victoria had maneuvered events, all while maintaining her composed exterior. Daniel's voice grew more certain as he asked questions about the inconsistencies, and Margaret noted how the careful phrasing of each question elicited measured responses from Victoria, revealing the gaps and hesitations that confirmed Margaret's suspicions. The air in the suite held a quiet intensity, the stillness accentuating each movement, each glance, each carefully chosen word. And Margaret allowed herself to absorb the full scene, seeing both the deliberate orchestration and the unintentional clues that exposed it. She considered the cumulative effect of Victoria's actions, recognizing the subtlety with which trust had been tested and patience stretched, and she allowed herself a calm assessment of how best to proceed, understanding that observation and timing were more powerful than immediate confrontation. Daniel's comprehension of the situation was unfolding gradually, and Margaret's steady presence offered him a sense of clarity, a framework in which he could process what he had witnessed without impulsive reaction. Margaret's experience in navigating complex family dynamics informed every silent judgment she made, the quiet recognition of motives and patterns forming the basis for careful planning and strategic consideration. She continued to watch the interactions between her son and daughter-in-law, noting the minute shifts in posture and tone, recording the narrative of the afternoon with precision, understanding that knowledge itself was the most potent tool, and that measured responses grounded in observation would ensure that the situation would be addressed with both clarity and dignity. As the sunlight waned, casting long, soft shadows across the room, Margaret's focus remained unwavering, her mind attentive to the unfolding dynamics, cataloging the subtle cues and small revelations that would guide the family through the remainder of the evening with deliberate control and quiet authority. Margaret remained in her seat as the room grew quieter, the soft glow from the evening lamps casting a warm light over the suite and reflecting off the polished wooden surfaces. Daniel had moved to the balcony to make a call, his movements deliberate and careful, the weight of his discoveries evident in the slow pace of his steps. Margaret observed Victoria as she rearranged a few decorative items on the table, her movements smooth yet precise, betraying an awareness of the scrutiny she was under. Every subtle gesture, every pause in speech, spoke volumes to Margaret, who had spent decades learning to read beyond what was spoken. She reflected on the earlier part of the day, the way she had prepared each room, checked the schedules, and ensured that every detail would contribute to a calm and welcoming environment, only to realize that those efforts had been quietly undermined by careful manipulation. Margaret's attention to detail now served her well, as she noted the inconsistencies in Victoria's behavior, the slight hesitation before answers, the overemphasis on innocuous explanations, and she cataloged these without comment, allowing the evidence to accumulate naturally. The light shifted subtly, marking the passage of time, and Margaret's mind worked through potential scenarios, assessing the impact of each observation, weighing timing and possible responses with careful precision. She reflected on the skill required to maintain composure, to observe without interjecting, and to allow the truth to become apparent through patience and quiet vigilance. Daniel returned to the room, holding a set of receipts and emails that confirmed some of the discrepancies, and Margaret noted the way he absorbed the information, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the measured breaths, the careful articulation of questions that pressed for clarity without accusation. Victoria adjusted her seating, her composure slightly strained, and Margaret noticed the slight shifts in posture, the micro-expressions that conveyed concern even as her voice remained controlled. Margaret considered the cumulative effect of these small revelations, how the timing, sequence, and subtlety of the manipulations had created the situation that now unfolded in full clarity. She allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection, recognizing the value of knowledge as power, and the necessity of patience and observation as tools to guide the next steps effectively. The room remained calm, the tension contained not through confrontation but through attentive awareness, and Margaret's measured presence provided a stabilizing influence, allowing Daniel to fully comprehend the situation while maintaining dignity and control. She mentally rehearsed the upcoming interactions, noting the importance of letting each piece of information emerge organically, ensuring that when discussion became necessary, it would be grounded in clarity, precision, and the quiet authority that Margaret had cultivated over a lifetime of managing complex family dynamics. As the evening deepened, Margaret remained poised, her focus unwavering, her mind cataloging, interpreting, and preparing for the deliberate and thoughtful approach that would ultimately allow the situation to be resolved with insight, patience, and measured confidence. Margaret remained seated, her hands resting lightly on her lap, as the subtle golden light of early evening filled the suite. The quiet rhythm of the room, punctuated only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of water lapping against the lake shore, provided a calm backdrop for observation. Daniel had returned to the table with additional documents, laying them carefully in front of him, his expression a mixture of concentration and dawning understanding. Margaret's eyes followed every slight movement of Victoria, noting the measured way she rearranged papers and adjusted the placement of her personal items, all of which suggested awareness and a conscious attempt to manage perception. Margaret reflected on the morning, remembering the way she had meticulously prepared the suite, checking each reservation, each itinerary, ensuring that the weekend would run smoothly, and yet recognizing now how subtle deviations had been orchestrated to obscure truth. She catalogued every observation silently, the hesitations in Victoria's speech, the careful avoidance of eye contact, the slight stiffness in posture whenever Daniel asked probing questions. Each small action revealed more than words could convey, providing Margaret with a detailed understanding of the situation without the need for confrontation. Daniel spoke softly, connecting dots as he reviewed emails, receipts, and schedules, and Margaret observed the interplay between evidence and reaction, noting how clarity unfolded gradually as each detail aligned with her own perception. The atmosphere in the suite remained composed yet charged, the quiet tension allowing insight to emerge without dramatic displays or overt accusations. Margaret considered the effectiveness of patience and observation, realizing that these had become her strongest tools in navigating complex family interactions. She reflected on the trust she had extended to both Daniel and Victoria, the small sacrifices and attention she had given to support family harmony, and the ways in which these gestures had been manipulated. Yet she maintained a calm exterior, absorbing the full scope of the revelations. The fading sunlight accentuated the contours of the room, highlighting the careful arrangement of furniture and decor, all of which Margaret had prepared as part of creating a welcoming environment. She noted the subtle changes in Victoria's demeanor, the shifts in tone, the brief pauses that betrayed thought processes, and she catalogued them meticulously, her mind working steadily to construct a complete picture of events. Daniel's understanding deepened with each piece of information, his questions measured and deliberate, and Margaret allowed him space to explore the inconsistencies, providing quiet guidance only through attentive presence. The evening stretched on, and Margaret's awareness remained sharp. Every gesture, every word, and every micro-expression accounted for, forming a comprehensive understanding of the dynamics at play. She maintained her composed posture, the quiet authority of her observation shaping the room's energy, ensuring that when the time came to act or respond, decisions would be informed, deliberate, and precise, grounded in the careful collection of insight and the measured application of knowledge acquired over a lifetime of experience. Margaret shifted slightly in her seat, the quiet hum of the air conditioning blending with the distant lapping of water against the shore outside, creating a serene backdrop that contrasted sharply with the intensity of the observations she had been making all evening. The suite was orderly, each item in its place, reflecting the meticulous preparation she had undertaken to ensure the family would feel welcomed and comfortable during the trip, a gesture meant to foster connection and harmony. Daniel leaned against the railing, reviewing the information he had gathered, his brow furrowed, the realization of the full scope of events settling in with each carefully considered detail. Margaret watched Victoria, noting the subtle changes in posture, the brief pauses in speech, and the way her eyes darted toward documents and emails, all signaling awareness and the careful management of perception. Margaret catalogued these cues silently, understanding the importance of patience and observation, allowing the unfolding of truth to occur naturally without interference. She reflected on the day's earlier moments, the breakfast she had prepared with fresh fruit, pastries, and brewed coffee, arranged to create a welcoming environment, and the minor adjustments she had made to ensure everything ran smoothly. Each small deviation by Victoria now revealed its significance, forming a pattern that explained the tension and inconsistencies that Daniel had begun to recognize. Margaret's experience and keen attention to detail allowed her to assess the situation with precision, noting the ways in which information could be confirmed and the subtle methods by which trust had been tested. Daniel's questions became more focused as he sought clarification on specific discrepancies, and Margaret observed the dynamic with quiet attentiveness, recognizing how each interaction contributed to the understanding of events without necessitating confrontation. The sunlight outside continued to wane, casting long shadows across the room, and Margaret's composure remained unwavering, her presence offering a calm anchor amidst the subtle turbulence. She reflected on previous experiences, the time she had mediated disputes and smoothed tensions, recognizing how these skills now allowed her to perceive the full picture without reactive emotion. Every micro-expression, every carefully chosen word, every slight hesitation was catalogued, forming a clear narrative of deliberate manipulation. Margaret's mind worked steadily, preparing for future actions with deliberation, considering timing and impact, and maintaining the quiet authority that had guided her for decades in managing complex family interactions. The room remained a space of calm vigilance, each member aware in varying degrees of the truth, and Margaret's patient observation ensured that when discussion or resolution occurred, it would be informed, precise, and grounded in the careful understanding she had cultivated through experience, allowing insight, clarity, and measured response to shape the final outcomes of the evening. Margaret remained calm, her posture poised as the evening light faded and the room settled into a gentle quiet. The air carried the faint scent of pine from the surrounding landscape outside the lake, mingling with the subtle aroma of coffee that had been prepared hours earlier, a reminder of the careful routine she maintained to create a sense of comfort. Daniel had spread the documents across the coffee table, carefully cross-referencing schedules, receipts, and notes, his movements deliberate and thoughtful as he sought to piece together the full scope of events. Margaret observed Victoria as she adjusted a few items on the shelves, her movements precise, her composure intact yet betraying subtle tension in the way she glanced toward Daniel, aware of his scrutiny. Every small gesture, every hesitation, every carefully chosen word was catalogued by Margaret, forming a comprehensive understanding of the underlying intentions without the need for immediate confrontation. She reflected on the preparations made for the trip, the careful selection of accommodations, the attention to detail in arranging meals and activities, all intended to foster connection and ease, and contrasted this with the subtle manipulation she had now recognized, which had quietly shifted the dynamics of the family interactions. Margaret noted the sequence of behaviors that led to this realization, the pattern of omissions, small misdirections, and carefully managed perceptions, and allowed herself to understand the full narrative without emotional reaction, observing instead with clarity and focus. Daniel's comprehension deepened as he questioned details and considered the implications of the discrepancies, and Margaret's quiet presence provided a stabilizing influence, enabling him to absorb the information without distraction. Victoria's demeanor remained outwardly composed, but the minute tensions in her expressions and the rhythm of her speech indicated the awareness that her actions had been discerned, and Margaret took note of these without comment, appreciating the subtlety of human behavior and the power of patient observation. The soft evening light shifted across the room, highlighting the careful arrangement of furniture, the polished surfaces, and the order Margaret maintained as part of creating an environment conducive to calm and clarity. She allowed the realization of the events to fully form in the minds of both Daniel and herself, knowing that the accumulation of evidence and perception had created a foundation for deliberate and informed action. Margaret's reflections encompassed the careful balancing of patience, timing, and insight, ensuring that any responses or decisions would be guided by a full understanding of human behavior and motivation. The suite remained a place of quiet attention, each subtle movement, glance, and gesture analyzed and recorded mentally, creating a complete picture that would guide the family through the resolution of the evening's tensions. Margaret's calm authority and thoughtful observation allowed clarity to emerge, ensuring that when the time came to act or speak, her words and decisions would be deliberate, precise, and grounded in the insights accumulated through careful, patient observation over the course of the day, maintaining dignity and control while navigating the complex interactions between family members.